What if aging could be reversed? For the past 5,000 years of recorded human history, every single person who has ever lived has faced the same inevitable fate. Pharaohs and peasants, kings and commoners, geniuses and fools, all of them aged, all of them died, all of them became dust. The richest person who ever lived couldn't buy a single extra day. The most powerful ruler who ever reigned couldn't command their cells to stop aging. The greatest minds who ever thought couldn't solve the puzzle of their own mortality, until now. In laboratories around the world, something extraordinary is happening. Scientists aren't just extending life, they're reversing it. They're not just slowing aging, they're stopping it. They're not just treating the symptoms of growing old, they're curing aging itself. This isn't science fiction. This isn't wishful thinking. This isn't some distant fantasy that might happen in 100 years. This is science fact happening right now, in ways that would have seemed impossible just a decade ago. A mouse that was elderly and frail last month is now young and vigorous today. Its grey fur has turned dark, its slow movements have become quick and energetic. Its clouded eyes are now clear and bright. The same mouse, but with its biological clock turned backward by human hands. A human patient, aged 78, receives an experimental treatment. Within months, their biological markers suggest they have the cellular age of a 50-year-old. Their muscles strengthen, their memory sharpens, their energy returns. The calendar says they're getting older, but their body insists they're getting younger. A drop of blood from a 20-year-old can rejuvenate the tissues of an 80-year-old. A simple injection can reset cellular programming that took decades to develop. A few specific genes, properly activated, can make old cells behave like young ones again. These aren't miracles. They're the result of the most ambitious scientific endeavour in human history, the quest to defeat humanity's oldest enemy, death itself. But here's what's truly remarkable. The scientists making these breakthroughs don't think they're creating something new. They think they're discovering something that was always there, hidden in our biology, waiting to be unlocked. They believe that aging isn't a law of nature, it's a design flaw that can be fixed. Consider this. A human child can regrow a fingertip completely if it's cut off before age 2. A salamander can regrow an entire limb throughout its lifetime. A jellyfish can literally reverse its development and become young again when threatened. A type of mouse called a naked mole rat lives 30 times longer than other rodents and never seems to age at all. If other species can do these things, why can't we? What if the question isn't whether aging can be reversed, but why we ever accepted that it couldn't be? The researchers we'll meet in the next hour don't just think differently about aging, they think differently about death itself. They see it not as a natural conclusion to life, but as a medical problem waiting for a solution. They view every person who dies of old age not as someone who lived a full life, but as someone who died of a preventable disease, and they're not working on some distant cure that might help future generations. They're working on treatments that could help you today, right now. The therapies being developed in laboratories around the world aren't designed for your great-grandchildren. They're designed for you to give to your great-grandchildren personally, centuries from now. But as we'll discover together, the science of defeating aging raises questions that go far beyond medicine. Questions that challenge everything we think we know about life, death, love, meaning, and what it truly means to be human. What happens to marriage when till death do us part could mean forever? What happens to careers when retirement becomes meaningless? What happens to the planet when humans stop dying? What happens to human nature itself when death becomes optional? We stand at the threshold of the most profound transformation in human history. Not the agricultural revolution, not the industrial revolution, not even the digital revolution, but the biological revolution that could make all previous revolutions seem insignificant by comparison. The fountain of youth isn't a myth from ancient legends. It's not a metaphor for spiritual renewal. It's not a symbol of humanity's impossible dreams. It's a laboratory. It's a treatment. It's a choice, and it's closer than you think. We're about to take you inside the rooms where death is being defeated, where aging is being reversed, where the impossible is becoming inevitable. You'll meet the scientists who refuse to accept that growing old is natural. You'll see the experiments that are rewriting the rules of biology. You'll witness the technologies that could transform you from mortal to immortal. But most importantly, you'll discover that the fountain of youth isn't just about living longer. It's about living differently. It's about becoming something that humanity has never been before. A species that chooses its own fate, writes its own biological destiny, and decides for itself whether death is a period at the end of life's sentence or just a comma that we can choose to erase. The age of aging is ending. The age of agelessness is about to begin. The only question is, are you ready to live forever? Because ready or not, forever is coming. And it starts now. Chapter 1. The Immortal Mouse. In a laboratory in Boston, something impossible is happening. An old mouse, its fur greyed with age, moves slowly across its cage. Its breathing is laboured. Its eyes are clouded. By every measure we know, this mouse is dying of old age. But watch what happens next. A researcher approaches with a syringe containing a clear liquid. The injection takes seconds. The mouse barely notices. Nothing seems to change. But time will tell a different story. Over the next 4 weeks, something extraordinary unfolds. The mouse's grey fur begins to darken. Its movements become more fluid, more purposeful. Its clouded eyes clear. Its breathing steadies. By the end of the month, this elderly mouse has become young again. This is not computer animation. This is not science fiction. This is science fact, happening in laboratories around the world right now. And it's about to change everything we thought we knew about life, death, and the nature of aging itself. For thousands of years, humans have accepted aging as the price of living. We're born, we grow, we flourish, and then we begin the slow, inevitable decline towards death. It's written into our literature, our philosophy, our religions. Aging is the ultimate equalizer, the one fate that unites every human being who has ever lived. But what if we've been wrong about aging all along? What if aging isn't a law of nature, but a disease? What if the greying hair, the creaking joints, the fading memory, the increasing frailty aren't inevitable consequences of time passing, but symptoms of a condition we can diagnose, treat, and potentially cure? This radical idea first emerged in the 1960s when a handful of maverick scientists began asking heretical questions. Why do some species live for centuries while others die in days? Why do identical twins age at different rates? Why do some people remain vibrant at 90 while others decline at 50? The answers they found would challenge everything we thought we knew about the biology of life itself. Dr. Leonard Hayflick made the first crack in our understanding when he discovered that human cells have a built-in expiration date. In his laboratory, he watched as healthy cells divided about 50 times before they simply stopped. This became known as the Hayflick limit, and it suggested that aging was programmed into our very cells. But if aging is programmed, that means it follows rules. And if it follows rules, those rules can be understood. And if they can be understood, they might be changed. The scientific revolution that followed would take us from simple observations about cellular division to the ability to reverse aging itself. It began with the recognition that aging isn't just about time passing. It's about specific biological processes that can be measured, tracked, and potentially controlled. Scientists discovered that aging happens at multiple levels simultaneously: Our DNA accumulates damage over time. Our cells become less efficient at producing energy. Our immune systems weaken, our tissues lose their ability to repair themselves. But here's the crucial insight. These aren't random breakdowns. They follow predictable patterns, and patterns can be interrupted. The transformation of aging research from fringe science to legitimate medical pursuit didn't happen overnight. It required a fundamental shift in how we think about biological time itself. For decades, scientists assumed that aging was like entropy, a one-way process toward increasing disorder. Just as a broken vase can't spontaneously reassemble itself, they believed that an aged body couldn't become young again. Time moves forward, and biology follows time, but nature had already proven this assumption wrong. We just hadn't been paying attention. Consider the immortal jellyfish, Turritopsis duerni. When this remarkable creature faces stress, disease, or old age, it doesn't die. Instead, it reverses its development, transforming back into a juvenile polyp. It literally grows young again. This jellyfish has achieved biological immortality through a process called transdifferentiation, where its cells change their identity and function. Or consider the humble lobster, which shows no signs of aging throughout its potentially centuries-long lifespan. Lobsters continue growing, reproducing, and maintaining their cellular function indefinitely. They don't die of old age, they die of external causes like disease, predation, or the sheer physical stress of molting their increasingly massive shells. These examples from nature revealed a startling truth. Aging isn't universal, it's not even necessary. Some organisms have evolved ways to slow, stop, or even reverse the aging process. If evolution can create biological immortality, why can't human ingenuity? The breakthrough came when scientists realized that aging research needed to shift from asking "why do we age?" to "how do we age?" The mechanisms of aging, once understood, could potentially be manipulated. This shift transformed aging from a philosophical inevitability into an engineering problem, and engineers solve problems. The first major success came with simple organisms. Scientists discovered that by manipulating single genes, they could double or triple the lifespan of nematode worms. The gene called DAF2, which controls insulin signaling, became a key to longevity. Worms with reduced DAF2 function lived twice as long as normal worms and remained healthy and active throughout their extended lives. But the real breakthrough came when scientists realized that the same genetic pathways that control aging in worms also exist in mice and in humans. The fundamental mechanisms of aging, refined over millions of years of evolution, are remarkably conserved across species. This conservation meant that discoveries made in simple laboratory organisms could potentially be applied to human biology. The mouse that became young again wasn't just a laboratory curiosity. It was proof of concept for human rejuvenation. The journey from laboratory worm to rejuvenated mouse took decades of painstaking research. Scientists had to map the complex networks of genes that control aging. They had to understand how these genes interact with each other and with environmental factors. They had to develop tools precise enough to manipulate these systems without causing harm. But perhaps most importantly, they had to overcome the deeply ingrained assumption that aging is irreversible. The scientific community had to accept that biological time might not be as linear as we thought. The evidence became overwhelming. Mice with genetic modifications lived longer and healthier lives. Dietary interventions could extend lifespan dramatically. Pharmaceutical compounds could slow the aging process. The field of longevity research exploded from a small collection of maverick scientists into a major medical discipline. Pharmaceutical companies began investing billions of dollars in anti-aging research. The National Institutes of Health established new funding programs for aging biology. Silicon Valley entrepreneurs launched companies dedicated to extending human lifespan. But the most dramatic proof that aging could be reversed came from an unexpected source: the ability to reprogram adult cells back to their embryonic state. This discovery would open the door to cellular time travel, allowing scientists to wind back the biological clock of individual cells to their youngest, most vigorous state. The implications were staggering. If individual cells could be made young again, what about tissues? What about organs? What about entire organisms? The rejuvenated mouse represented the culmination of this scientific revolution. It was living proof that aging isn't a one-way street. It demonstrated that the biological clock can be reset, that cellular time can be reversed, that the seemingly impossible dream of a fountain of youth might actually be within our grasp. But as scientists celebrated this breakthrough, they also confronted a troubling reality. The same techniques that could make cells young again carried hidden dangers. The line between rejuvenation and cancer, between controlled cellular reprogramming and uncontrolled cellular chaos, proved to be razor-thin. The rejuvenated mouse lived longer and healthier than its unmodified counterparts. But other mice in similar experiments developed tumours. Some died from the very treatments designed to make them young again. This paradox would define the next phase of aging research. Scientists had proven that aging could be reversed, but they still needed to learn how to do it safely. The fountain of youth, it turned out, could also be a fountain of death. The challenge was no longer whether aging could be reversed, but how to harness this power without unleashing unintended consequences. The biology of aging was more complex than anyone had imagined, and the cellular mechanisms that controlled it were connected to the most fundamental processes of life itself. As we watched that mouse regain its youth, we were witnessing more than a scientific breakthrough. We were seeing the beginning of a new chapter in human history, one where the ancient dream of conquering death might finally be within reach. But first, we needed to understand exactly what was happening inside that mouse's cells. We needed to journey into the microscopic world where aging actually occurs, where time is measured not in years but in cellular divisions, where the battle between youth and age plays out at the molecular level. The secrets of aging and its reversal lay hidden in the most fundamental building blocks of life itself. Chapter 2. The Cellular Time Machine. Right now, as you sit watching this, something extraordinary is happening inside your body. Trillions of microscopic factories are working around the clock, each one following instructions written in a code older than civilization itself. These factories are your cells, and they've been faithfully serving you since the moment you were conceived. But here's what will shock you. These same loyal servants are also the reason you're aging, and they hold the key to turning back time itself. For centuries we believed aging happened to us from the outside in, that wrinkles appeared, muscles weakened, and minds slowed because of some mysterious external force wearing us down. We were wrong. Aging doesn't happen to your cells. Aging is your cells. Every grey hair, every aching joint, every forgotten name starts with a single cell making a fateful decision deep inside your body. But what if I told you that scientists have learned to eavesdrop on these cellular conversations, and more importantly, they've learned to change what your cells are saying? Welcome to the most important battlefield in the war against aging, a battlefield so small that millions could fit on the head of a pin, yet so crucial that it determines whether you'll live to see your great-grandchildren graduate from college or fade away decades before your time. Picture this. You're walking through a vibrant neighborhood where every house is perfectly maintained, lawns are manicured, and neighbors wave cheerfully as they go about their daily business. This is your body when you're young, every cell pulling its weight, doing its job, contributing to the community. But now imagine that one house stops mowing its lawn, the paint starts peeling, the residents stop taking out the trash. Slowly, this neglect spreads to the neighbouring houses, and before you know it, the entire neighbourhood is in decline. This isn't just a metaphor. This is exactly what happens inside your body as you age, and those deteriorating houses are what scientists call senescent cells. But here's where the metaphor breaks down, because these aren't just neglected houses. These are biological zombies, and they're far more dangerous than any Hollywood monster. When a healthy cell encounters stress, damage, or simply reaches the end of its useful life, it faces a choice. It can either repair itself, divide to create new healthy cells, or if the damage is too severe, it can commit cellular suicide for the greater good. But sometimes a cell chooses a third option, one that nature never intended. It becomes senescent, existing in a twilight state between life and death. These zombie cells stop dividing, which sounds harmless enough, but they don't stop talking. In fact, they become the neighbourhood gossips from hell, constantly broadcasting inflammatory signals that poison their healthy neighbours. They release proteins with names like interleukin-6 and tumour necrosis factor alpha, molecules that sound like weapons of war because that's essentially what they are. These signals create a state of chronic inflammation that slowly destroys the tissues around them. Here's what makes this truly insidious. Senescent cells accumulate throughout your life. You're born with essentially none, but by age 60 they make up about 15% of your cells. By 80 they can comprise up to 30%. Imagine if 30% of the people in your city suddenly stopped working but kept demanding resources and spreading negativity. The entire system would collapse. And that's exactly what happens to your body. But here's the incredible part. When scientists remove these zombie cells from old mice, something miraculous happens. The mice don't just stop aging, they actually become younger. Their fur regrows, their muscles strengthen, their memories sharpen. It's as if removing the neighbourhood troublemakers allows the entire community to flourish again. And the best part, this isn't science fiction. The first drugs designed to eliminate senescent cells in humans are already in clinical trials. Now, let me tell you about the most mind-bending discovery in the history of biology. What if I told you that every cell in your body contains the complete instruction manual for building an entire human being? What if I told you that the difference between your brain cells and your liver cells isn't what information they have, but simply which chapters of that manual they're reading? And what if I told you that scientists have learned to make cells forget which chapter they were reading and start over from the beginning? Think of your cells like smartphones running different apps. A brain cell is running the neuron app, a muscle cell is running the muscle app, and a skin cell is running the skin app. But here's the remarkable thing. They're all running on the same operating system, using the same underlying code. The apps might look completely different, but the phone is identical. As cells age, their software becomes corrupted. They start running slowly, making mistakes, and eventually some of their programs crash entirely. For decades, scientists assumed this was irreversible, that once a cell committed to being a particular type, it was locked into that identity forever. But then something extraordinary happened that changed everything we thought we knew about cellular identity. In laboratories around the world, researchers discovered that by introducing just 4 specific genetic factors into any adult cell, they could essentially perform a factory reset. These factors, discovered by Nobel Prize winner Shinya Yamanaka, act like cellular time machines. They strip away all the specialized programming that makes a cell into a brain cell or a liver cell or a skin cell, and they restore it to its original state, a pluripotent stem cell capable of becoming anything. Imagine taking a 60-year-old accountant and somehow returning them to the state of a newborn baby with unlimited potential to become a doctor, an artist, or an astronaut. That's essentially what Yamanaka factors do to cells. They don't just make cells young again, they make them young and completely naive, ready to receive new instructions and become whatever the body needs them to be. But here's where it gets even more incredible. Scientists realized they didn't need to completely erase a cell's identity to make it young again. They could apply these factors partially, like giving a cell just enough of a factory reset to clear out the accumulated damage and corruption without making it forget its job entirely. It's like restarting your computer to clear out the glitches while keeping all your files and programs intact. When researchers applied this partial reprogramming to old mice, the results were so dramatic they seemed impossible. The mice's muscles became stronger, their hearts pumped more efficiently, their kidneys filtered more effectively, and their brains processed information faster. They weren't just healthier, they were measurably younger by every biological test scientists could devise. The implications are staggering. If every cell in your body contains the information needed to be young again, and if scientists have learned to unlock that information, then aging isn't an inevitable deterioration. It's a software problem. And software problems, unlike hardware problems, can be fixed. Let me tell you the story of how 4 simple molecules changed everything we thought we knew about life, death, and the possibility of immortality. In 2006, a quiet Japanese scientist named Shinya Yamanaka was working on a problem that seemed impossible: how to turn back the developmental clock and make adult cells behave like embryonic stem cells again. Embryonic stem cells are nature's ultimate raw material. They can become any type of cell in the human body. But obtaining them required destroying embryos, which created enormous ethical controversies. Yamanaka wondered if there might be another way to achieve the same result without the ethical baggage. What he discovered didn't just solve the ethical problem, it revealed something profound about the nature of cellular identity itself. Working with skin cells from mice, Yamanaka and his team began a painstaking process of testing different combinations of genetic factors. They were looking for the minimal set of ingredients that could reprogram an adult cell back to its embryonic state. After years of trial and error, they identified 4 crucial factors: OCT4, SOX2, KLF4, and C-MYC. These 4 proteins, when introduced into adult cells, could completely rewind the developmental clock. The scientific world was stunned. In one elegant experiment, Yamanaka had proven that cellular identity isn't fixed, it's fluid. The difference between a brain cell and a skin cell isn't written in stone, it's written in software that can be rewritten. More importantly, he had shown that the aging process itself might be reversible at the most fundamental level. But here's what made Yamanaka's discovery truly revolutionary. These 4 factors don't just work on one type of cell, they work on every type of cell. Skin cells, brain cells, heart cells, liver cells, it doesn't matter. Feed them the right cocktail of Yamanaka factors and they all respond the same way, shedding their adult identities and returning to a state of youthful pluripotency. The implications rippled through the scientific community like an earthquake. If aging is fundamentally about the accumulation of cellular damage and the loss of cellular function, and if Yamanaka factors can reset cells to their youngest, most functional state, then aging might not be an inevitable consequence of living. It might be a treatable condition. But there was a problem. Full reprogramming with Yamanaka factors makes cells too young. They forget not just their age, but their entire identity, becoming embryonic stem cells that need to be retrained from scratch. It's like trying to fix a corrupted computer by completely wiping the hard drive. You solve the corruption problem, but you lose everything that made the computer useful. That's when scientists had a brilliant insight. What if they didn't need to completely reprogram cells? What if they could use just enough reprogramming to clear out the accumulated damage while leaving the cell's identity intact? This approach, called partial reprogramming, became the holy grail of anti-aging research. Early experiments with partial reprogramming yielded results that seemed too good to be true. Old mice treated with limited doses of Yamanaka factors showed improvements in every organ system. Their hearts beat stronger, their muscles grew more powerful, their brains processed information faster, and their immune systems responded more vigorously to challenges. Most remarkably, these improvements weren't just superficial. They extended deep into the molecular machinery of the cells themselves. The mice weren't just living longer, they were living better. Their cells were making fewer mistakes, their tissues were healing faster, and their organs were functioning with the efficiency of much younger animals. It was as if someone had found the cellular fountain of youth and figured out how to dispense it in precise, controlled doses. Today, multiple companies are racing to bring partial reprogramming therapies to human patients. The first clinical trials are already underway, testing whether the same 4 factors that can make mouse cells young again can do the same for human cells. The early results are cautiously optimistic, suggesting that what works in mice might indeed work in humans. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about the Yamanaka revolution isn't what it's already accomplished, it's what it's revealed about the nature of aging itself. For the first time in human history, we have scientific proof that aging isn't inevitable. It's not a law of physics or a fundamental property of living matter. It's a biological process that can be understood, modified, and potentially reversed. The 4 Yamanaka factors have shown us that inside every old cell lies a young cell waiting to be awakened. The question is no longer whether we can turn back the cellular clock, it's how safely and effectively we can do it. And as we stand on the brink of the first human trials of cellular reprogramming, we're about to find out whether the fountain of youth has been inside our cells all along. As we've journeyed into the microscopic world of your cells, we've discovered something that would have seemed like magic to previous generations. Your cells aren't just passive victims of aging, they're active participants that can be reprogrammed, rejuvenated and restored to their youthful state. The zombie cells that spread aging throughout your body can be eliminated. The biological software that controls cellular function can be debugged and updated. The developmental clock that ticks away your youth can be rewound. But here's what's truly remarkable. Everything we've discussed isn't theoretical. It's happening right now in laboratories around the world. Senescent cells are being cleared from aging tissues. Yamanaka factors are being used to rejuvenate old cells. The cellular time machine isn't science fiction, it's science fact. Yet, as extraordinary as these cellular interventions are, they represent just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Because aging doesn't just happen at the cellular level, it's also written into the very blueprint of life itself. Hidden in the twisting ladder of DNA lies both the cause of aging and its ultimate cure. The genetic fountain of youth isn't just a metaphor, it's a reality that scientists are learning to tap. But to understand how genetic approaches to aging work, we need to venture even deeper into the molecular machinery of life itself, where the difference between a mayfly that lives for a day and a tree that lives for 1,000 years is written in a code that we're finally learning to read. Chapter 3. The genetic fountain. What if I told you that somewhere in the depths of the ocean, a creature no bigger than your fingernail holds the secret to eternal life? What if I told you that deep underground, a wrinkled, buck-toothed rodent has never gotten cancer and barely ages at all? And what if I told you that swimming in Arctic waters right now is a shark that was alive when George Washington was born, and it's still going strong? These aren't fairy tales. These are real creatures living on our planet right now, and they've already solved the puzzle that has tormented humanity since the dawn of consciousness: how to cheat death itself. For centuries we searched for the fountain of youth in distant lands and mystical waters. We never thought to look where it actually was, written in the genetic code of life itself. Today, scientists are reading that code, deciphering its secrets, and learning to rewrite the very programming of aging. Welcome to the genetic frontier of immortality, where the difference between a mayfly that dies in a day and a tree that lives for millennia comes down to just a few crucial lines of biological code. And for the first time in human history, we're learning to edit that code ourselves. Picture this. You're swimming in the Mediterranean Sea, and floating before you is what looks like a tiny, translucent umbrella, no bigger than a pinky nail. It seems fragile, almost ethereal, pulsing gently through the water. You might swim right past it, never knowing you just encountered one of the most extraordinary organisms on Earth, a creature that has achieved true biological immortality. This is Turritopsis dohrnii, the immortal jellyfish, and it possesses a superpower that would make every superhero weep with envy. When this jellyfish faces stress, injury, or old age, it doesn't die. Instead, it does something that should be impossible according to everything we thought we knew about biology. It reverses its own development, transforming back into its juvenile form, essentially hitting a biological reset button that makes it young again. Think about that for a moment. Imagine if, when you started getting grey hair and wrinkles, you could simply decide to become 25 again. Your cells would reorganize, your body would rebuild itself, and you'd emerge as a young adult with all your memories intact, but your biology completely refreshed. This isn't science fiction. This is exactly what the immortal jellyfish does, over and over again, potentially forever. But the immortal jellyfish isn't alone in its rebellion against the supposed laws of aging. Deep in the underground tunnels of East Africa lives another biological rebel that has rewritten the rules of life and death. Meet the naked mole rat, a creature so ugly it's almost beautiful, so wrinkled it looks ancient from birth, yet so extraordinary that it might hold the key to human immortality. These bizarre rodents live in underground colonies like ants or bees, led by a queen who can live for over 30 years, an impossibly long time for a small mammal. But here's what makes them truly remarkable. Naked mole rats almost never get cancer. While laboratory mice develop tumours readily, and humans face increasing cancer risk as we age, naked mole rats have evolved genetic mechanisms that make cancer virtually impossible. Their cells produce a substance called high molecular weight hyaluronic acid that prevents the uncontrolled cell division that leads to tumours. They've essentially built cancer-proof bodies, solving one of aging's most deadly puzzles through genetic innovation that took millions of years to perfect. But if you want to see nature's ultimate achievement in longevity, you need to travel to the frigid waters of the Arctic and North Atlantic, where Greenland sharks glide through the darkness with ancient, knowing eyes. These massive predators grow slowly, mature late, and live for centuries. The oldest Greenland shark ever studied was estimated to be over 400 years old, meaning it was swimming through Arctic waters when Shakespeare was writing his plays. 4 centuries of life accumulated in the same body, the same brain, the same genetic programming that has resisted aging's assault for longer than most human civilizations have existed. What do these sharks know about longevity that we're only beginning to understand? The answer lies in their genes, in the specific DNA sequences that control how their cells divide, how their proteins fold, how their metabolism functions, and how their bodies respond to the damage that accumulates over time. These creatures aren't immortal by magic. They're immortal by design, by genetic programming that we're finally learning to read and understand. For decades, scientists believed aging was simply the inevitable breakdown of biological systems over time, like a car slowly wearing out, with nothing to be done but accept the deterioration. Then something extraordinary happened. Researchers began studying organisms with vastly different lifespans and discovered something that changed everything. Aging isn't random mechanical failure. It's controlled by specific genetic pathways that can be measured, understood, and potentially manipulated. Imagine your body as an incredibly sophisticated computer running the software of life. This software has several master programs that control how you age, and scientists have identified the 3 most important ones. Understanding these pathways is like understanding the control panel for human longevity. And remarkably, we're learning to reprogram them. The first pathway is called mTOR, which stands for Mechanistic Target of Rapamycin. Think of mTOR as your body's growth accelerator pedal. When you're young and growing, you want this pedal pressed down. mTOR drives cell division, protein synthesis, and all the processes that build a strong, healthy body. But here's the fascinating paradox. The same pathway that makes you grow strong when you're young also makes you age faster when you're older. When mTOR is constantly activated in adult life, it pushes cells to keep growing and dividing even when they shouldn't. It's like driving a car with the accelerator constantly floored. You'll get where you're going quickly, but you'll also burn out your engine much faster. Scientists discovered that when they reduced mTOR activity in laboratory animals, something remarkable happened. The animals lived significantly longer and remained healthier deep into their extended lifespans. The drug rapamycin, originally developed to prevent organ transplant rejection, turned out to inhibit the mTOR pathway. When researchers gave rapamycin to mice, even starting late in their lives, the mice lived longer and showed fewer age-related diseases. This was one of the first concrete proofs that aging could be slowed by targeting specific genetic pathways. The second major longevity pathway involves a family of proteins called sirtuins. Think of them as your cellular maintenance crew. While mTOR controls growth, sirtuins control repair and protection. These proteins work like molecular janitors, cleaning up cellular damage, protecting DNA from harmful modifications, and keeping your cellular machinery running smoothly. Here's where it gets really interesting. Sirtuin activity is controlled by your cellular energy status. When your cells detect that energy is scarce, during periods of fasting or caloric restriction, sirtuins kick into high gear, ramping up repair processes and protective mechanisms. This is why caloric restriction, one of the most reliable ways to extend lifespan in laboratory animals, actually works at the genetic level. Scientists discovered that certain compounds can activate sirtuins even without caloric restriction. Resveratrol, found in red wine, was one of the first sirtuin activators identified, leading to headlines about wine being good for longevity. While the reality is more complex, you'd need to drink impossible amounts of wine to get therapeutic levels of resveratrol. The principle remains sound. We can potentially activate longevity pathways with specific molecules. The third crucial pathway is the insulin and IGF-1 signaling system, which you can think of as your body's metabolic master controller. This pathway determines how your cells respond to nutrients and growth signals throughout your life. When this pathway is highly active, it promotes growth and reproduction, but also accelerates aging. When it's reduced, organisms live longer, but may grow more slowly and reproduce less. This creates what scientists call the longevity trade-off. The same genetic programs that make you strong and fertile when you're young also make you age faster overall. It's as if evolution programmed us to burn bright and fast rather than dim and long, prioritizing reproduction over longevity. But here's the revolutionary discovery. These pathways aren't fixed. They can be modified, adjusted and optimized. Scientists have created genetically modified worms, flies and mice with altered versions of these pathways, and the results are stunning. Some modified organisms live twice as long as normal, remaining healthy and active throughout their extended lifespans. We're essentially learning to reprogram the genetic software of aging, adjusting the settings that control how fast or slow our biological clocks tick. And the most exciting part? We're discovering that these same pathways exist in humans with the same potential for modification and optimization. Now comes the moment when science fiction becomes scientific reality. Everything we've learned about longevity pathways in laboratory animals is leading to a single, breathtaking possibility. What if we could directly modify human genes to extend lifespan and combat aging? What if we could install the genetic programs for longevity directly into our own cells? This isn't theoretical anymore. Gene therapy for aging is happening right now in laboratories and clinical trials around the world, and the early results are both promising and sobering. Let me tell you about Liz Parrish, a woman who made headlines around the world for becoming her own first patient in an experimental gene therapy trial. Frustrated by the slow pace of traditional clinical trials, Parrish travelled overseas to receive an experimental treatment designed to lengthen her telomeres, the protective caps on chromosomes that shorten with age, and deliver growth hormone genes directly to her muscle cells. The treatment involved modified viruses carrying therapeutic genes injected directly into her bloodstream and muscles. These viral vectors were designed to seek out her cells and deliver new genetic instructions, produce more telomerase to maintain telomeres, and generate growth factors to maintain muscle mass and strength. Was it reckless? Possibly. Was it effective? The jury is still out, but Parrish's biological age markers did appear to improve in the months following treatment. More importantly, her bold experiment highlighted both the incredible potential and the serious risks of genetic approaches to aging. The potential is staggering. Imagine receiving an injection that delivers longevity genes directly to your cells, genes that produce antioxidant enzymes to protect against cellular damage, genes that enhance DNA repair mechanisms, or genes that produce protective proteins found in long-lived species. Scientists are working on all of these approaches, using sophisticated viral vectors that can target specific tissues and deliver precise genetic modifications. One of the most promising approaches involves gene therapy to boost telomerase activity. Telomeres are like the plastic tips on shoelaces, protecting our chromosomes from damage during cell division. As we age, our telomeres get shorter, and when they become critically short, cells stop dividing and become senescent, those zombie cells we talked about earlier. Researchers have developed gene therapies that can deliver the telomerase gene directly to cells, instructing them to rebuild their telomeres and essentially reset their cellular clocks. In laboratory studies, this approach has successfully rejuvenated old cells and extended cellular lifespan dramatically. But here's where the promise meets the peril. Telomerase activation can also promote cancer. Cancer cells use telomerase to become immortal, dividing endlessly without the normal cellular safeguards that limit growth. The challenge is finding ways to boost telomerase enough to prevent cellular aging without creating conditions that promote cancer development. Another cutting-edge approach uses CRISPR gene editing to make precise modifications to longevity genes. Scientists can now edit genes as easily as editing a Word document, deleting harmful mutations, and inserting beneficial variants. Researchers are using CRISPR to give laboratory animals the longevity variants found in exceptionally long-lived humans, essentially democratizing genetic advantages that were previously limited to the genetically fortunate. The possibilities seem endless. Editing genes to produce more efficient antioxidant systems, modifying metabolism genes to improve cellular energy production, or even inserting entirely new genes borrowed from long-lived species. Imagine having the DNA repair systems of a Greenland shark, the cancer resistance of a naked mole rat, and the cellular maintenance systems optimized through millions of years of evolution. But with this incredible power comes unprecedented responsibility. Genetic modifications are potentially permanent and could have effects we don't fully understand. Unlike a drug that can be stopped if it causes problems, genetic changes could be with us for life, or even passed on to future generations if they affect reproductive cells. There's also the question of equality and access. Gene therapies are expensive and complex, potentially creating a world where longevity becomes a privilege of the wealthy rather than a universal human right. We could be creating a genetic class system where some humans are genetically enhanced for longevity, while others age and die according to their natural genetic programming. Yet despite these challenges, the research continues at an accelerating pace. Clinical trials are underway testing gene therapies for age-related diseases, and it's only a matter of time before these approaches are tested specifically for longevity enhancement. We're approaching a moment in human history when we might be able to edit our own genetic destiny, choosing how long we live and how well we age. The question isn't whether this technology will be available, it's whether we'll be wise enough to use it responsibly and whether we're prepared for the world we're about to create. As we stand on the brink of genetically engineering human longevity, as we prepare to edit the very code of life itself, one crucial question remains unanswered. We've learned to read the genetic instructions for aging. We've identified the pathways that control lifespan, and we've developed the tools to modify them directly in human cells. But there's something else circulating through our bodies right now, something that changes dramatically as we age, something that might hold an even more immediate key to reversing the aging process. It's not hidden in our DNA, locked away in the nucleus of our cells. It's flowing through our veins right now, carrying messages between our organs, delivering the molecular signals that coordinate our entire body's response to aging. What if the secret to eternal youth isn't just in our genes, but in our blood itself? What if the fountain of youth isn't a mythical spring, but the very fluid that flows through our arteries and veins? And what if the path to immortality requires not just editing our genetic code, but transforming the molecular composition of our blood? The most startling discovery in aging research may not be genetic at all. It may be liquid, it may be flowing through your body right now, and it may require a solution that sounds more like ancient folklore than modern science. The vampires, it turns out, might have been onto something after all. Chapter 4. The Vampire Cure. What if I told you that the fountain of youth isn't hidden in some mythical spring, but flowing through the veins of every young person walking past you on the street? What if the secret to reversing aging has been circulating inside our bodies all along, waiting for science to discover what folklore has whispered about for centuries? Tonight, we're about to explore one of the most extraordinary and unsettling discoveries in modern medicine. A discovery so profound it challenges everything we thought we knew about aging, yet so simple it sounds like something out of a vampire novel. We're talking about the revolutionary science of young blood and how it might hold the key to turning back time itself. This isn't science fiction. This isn't ancient mythology. This is happening right now in laboratories around the world where researchers have uncovered something that seems impossible. The blood of the young can literally make the old young again. Picture this scene. In a sterile laboratory, two mice lie side by side on a surgical table. One is young, its fur sleek and dark, its movements quick and purposeful. The other is old, grey-furred and slow, showing all the signs of advanced age. What happens next sounds like something from a horror movie, but it's actually one of the most elegant experiments in modern biology. The surgeon carefully connects the circulatory systems of these two mice, creating what scientists call parabiosis, literally meaning living beside. The young mouse and the old mouse now share the same blood supply. Their hearts pump the same mixture of young and old blood through both their bodies. And then something extraordinary begins to happen. Over the following weeks, the old mouse starts to change. Its grey fur begins to darken. Its movements become more agile. Its brain, which had been showing signs of age-related decline, begins to function like a younger brain. Most remarkably, when researchers examine its tissues under a microscope, they find that the old mouse's stem cells, those crucial cells responsible for repairing and renewing tissues, have awakened from their age-induced slumber and are dividing like young cells again. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. The young mouse, now sharing its blood with its elderly partner, begins to age rapidly. Its once vibrant tissues start showing signs of premature aging. Its stem cells become sluggish and less effective. In essence, the young mouse is aging faster while the old mouse is growing younger. This isn't magic. This isn't wishful thinking. This is reproducible science that has been demonstrated in laboratories around the world. Something in young blood can reverse aging, while something in old blood can accelerate it. The question that has consumed researchers ever since is deceptively simple. What exactly is it? Imagine if you could bottle youth itself. Not the feeling of being young, not the appearance of youth, but the actual biological mechanisms that make young bodies heal faster, think clearer, and function better. That's exactly what scientists set out to do when they began hunting for the mysterious factors in young blood responsible for these remarkable transformations. The search began with a simple observation. When researchers took blood from young mice and injected it into old mice, many of the benefits of parabiosis occurred without the need for surgical connection. This meant that whatever was causing the rejuvenation was circulating freely in the bloodstream, a molecular fountain of youth that could be isolated, studied, and potentially replicated. The hunt led scientists to discover a protein called GDF11, or growth differentiation factor 11. In young animals, GDF-11 levels are high, but they decline dramatically with age. When researchers injected GDF-11 into old mice, something remarkable happened. The mice's hearts, which had become enlarged and weakened with age, began to shrink back to their youthful size and regain their strength. Their skeletal muscles, which had become weak and atrophied, began to regenerate and grow stronger. Even their brains showed signs of improved function and increased neurogenesis, the birth of new brain cells. But GDF-11 wasn't working alone. Scientists discovered that young blood contains a cocktail of beneficial factors that work together to maintain youth and vitality. There's oxytocin, the same hormone associated with love and bonding, which helps muscle regeneration and reduces inflammation. There are specific proteins that keep stem cells active and responsive. There are growth factors that promote healing and tissue repair. Perhaps most intriguingly, researchers found that the ratio of these factors changes dramatically with age. It's not just that young blood has more good stuff. It's that old blood accumulates bad stuff. Aging blood becomes loaded with inflammatory proteins, growth inhibitors, and other factors that actively promote aging and disease. Think of it this way. If your body is like a garden, young blood is like rich, fertile soil that helps everything grow and flourish. Old blood, on the other hand, becomes like contaminated soil that not only fails to nourish, but actually poisons the plants trying to grow in it. This discovery opened up an entirely new way of thinking about aging. What if aging isn't just about cells wearing out over time, but about the environment those cells live in becoming increasingly toxic? What if we could clean up that environment and restore the conditions that allow cells to function like they did when we were young? The transition from laboratory discovery to human application is always the most challenging part of medical research, but when it comes to blood-based anti-aging treatments, the stakes feel higher than usual. We're not just talking about treating a disease, we're talking about potentially rewriting the fundamental experience of human aging. The first human trials began cautiously, focusing on patients with specific age-related conditions rather than healthy people seeking to reverse aging. Researchers started with Alzheimer's disease, reasoning that if young blood could rejuvenate old brains in mice, it might help humans struggling with cognitive decline. The early results were intriguing, if not revolutionary. Some patients showed modest improvements in cognitive function after receiving transfusions of young plasma, the liquid portion of blood that contains all those beneficial factors researchers had identified. Brain scans revealed increased activity in regions associated with memory and learning. Some patients' families reported that their loved ones seemed more alert and engaged, but the scientific community remained cautiously skeptical, and for good reason. The human studies were small, and the improvements, while statistically significant, were modest. More importantly, researchers still didn't fully understand which components of young blood were responsible for the benefits, making it difficult to optimize treatments or ensure safety. Meanwhile, a more controversial development was taking place outside the traditional medical establishment. Companies began offering young blood transfusions to wealthy individuals seeking to reverse aging, charging tens of thousands of dollars for treatments that hadn't been proven safe or effective in humans. These so-called vampire clinics attracted international attention and considerable criticism from the medical community. The controversy highlighted a fundamental challenge in aging research: the gap between what we know works in laboratory animals and what we can safely and ethically offer to humans. Young blood clearly has remarkable effects in mice, but mice aren't humans. Their lifespans are measured in years, not decades. Their blood volumes are measured in milliliters, not liters. The factors that rejuvenate a mouse brain might not have the same effect on a human brain that has accumulated 70 years of damage. Dr. Tony Weiss-Correa, one of the leading researchers in this field, puts it this way. We're essentially trying to reverse decades of aging with a treatment that we give over a few hours. It would be like trying to turn a 70-year-old back into a 20-year-old with a single intervention. The biology is just not that simple. Yet even as researchers urge caution, the science continues to advance. New studies are identifying more specific factors in young blood that contribute to rejuvenation. Scientists are developing synthetic versions of these factors that could provide the benefits of young blood without requiring actual blood transfusions. And perhaps most importantly, researchers are beginning to understand not just what young blood does, but how it does it. But there's a darker side to this story, one that reveals aging to be more complex and more sinister than we ever imagined. While young blood can make old tissues younger, old blood can make young tissues older. This isn't just about the absence of good factors, it's about the presence of actively harmful ones. As we age, our blood becomes increasingly loaded with what scientists call pro-aging factors, proteins and other molecules that actively accelerate aging and promote disease. These aren't just byproducts of aging, they're active participants in the aging process itself. They send signals to our cells, telling them to stop dividing, to stop repairing themselves, to essentially give up and wait to die. One of the most significant of these pro-aging factors is a protein called CCL11 or eotaxin. Young blood contains very little CCL11, but levels rise dramatically with age. When researchers inject CCL11 into young mice, it has devastating effects on their brains, reducing neurogenesis and impairing cognitive function. In essence, this single protein can make a young brain act like an old one. But CCL11 isn't alone. Old blood contains elevated levels of inflammatory proteins like TNF-alpha and interleukin-6, which promote chronic inflammation throughout the body. It contains growth inhibitors that prevent stem cells from doing their job of repairing and renewing tissues. It contains proteins that promote cellular senescence, the process by which cells stop dividing and start secreting harmful factors that damage neighboring cells. This revelation has profound implications for how we think about aging. It suggests that aging isn't just about our cells wearing out over time, but about our blood becoming increasingly toxic to our own tissues. Every day as we get older, our circulatory system is delivering a more potent cocktail of aging-promoting factors to every cell in our body. Think about it this way. If young blood is like clean, fresh water nourishing a garden, old blood is like increasingly polluted water that not only fails to nourish but actively poisons the plants. The question becomes, can we clean up that polluted water? This is where the science becomes truly revolutionary. Researchers have discovered that they can remove many of these pro-aging factors from old blood using a process called plasmapheresis, essentially filtering the blood to remove harmful proteins while leaving beneficial ones intact. When they do this in old mice, the effects are dramatic. The mice's tissues begin to function like younger tissues. Their stem cells become more active. Their brains show improved function. Even more remarkably, researchers have found that they can achieve similar effects by diluting old blood with saline solution. This simple procedure, which essentially waters down the concentration of pro-aging factors, can partially restore youthful function to old tissues. It's as if aging is partly caused by our blood becoming too concentrated with harmful factors, and simply diluting it can help reverse the process. As we stand on the brink of potentially revolutionary blood-based anti-aging treatments, we must confront some deeply uncomfortable ethical questions. If the secret to youth lies in young blood, who gets to be young and who must grow old? The most obvious concern is access and equity. Young blood, by definition, must come from young people. If blood-based anti-aging treatments become widespread, we could create a world where the young are literally sustaining the old, where youth becomes a commodity to be harvested and sold to the highest bidder. Imagine a future where poor young people sell their blood to wealthy older individuals, creating a biological class system where the rich can buy youth while the poor must accept aging and death. This isn't science fiction, it's a real possibility that researchers and ethicists are grappling with right now. But the ethical implications go deeper than just economics. If we can use young blood to reverse aging, are we obligated to do so? Is aging a natural process that we should accept, or is it a disease that we have a moral duty to cure? If we can prevent the suffering that comes with aging, the pain, the disability, the cognitive decline, don't we have a responsibility to do so? And what about the young people whose blood could provide these benefits? Do they have a duty to share their biological gifts with those who are aging? Or do they have a right to keep their youth for themselves? These questions become even more complex when we consider that the blood of the very young, children and teenagers, might be the most potent for reversing aging. Dr. Amy Wagers, a stem cell biologist at Harvard Medical School, reflects on these dilemmas. We're potentially talking about fundamentally altering the human experience of aging. That's not something we should do lightly or without careful consideration of the consequences. The question isn't just whether we can do this, but whether we should. There's also the question of what happens to society if blood-based anti-aging treatments become widely available. If people can maintain their youth indefinitely, what happens to the natural cycle of generations? What happens to career progression, to family structures, to the entire concept of retirement? How do we plan for a future where people might live for centuries rather than decades? These aren't just philosophical questions, they're practical concerns that will need to be addressed as the science advances. Some researchers are already proposing frameworks for ensuring equitable access to anti-aging treatments. Others are developing synthetic alternatives to young blood that could provide the same benefits without requiring donations from young people. As we look toward the future of blood-based anti-aging treatments, we're standing at a crossroads between incredible promise and profound uncertainty. The science is advancing rapidly, but we're still in the early stages of understanding how to safely and effectively translate laboratory discoveries into human therapies. The next generation of treatments won't necessarily require actual blood transfusions. Researchers are developing synthetic versions of the beneficial factors found in young blood, creating what they call engineered youth factors that could provide the same benefits without the need for blood donors. These synthetic factors could be mass-produced, standardized, and potentially made available to anyone, regardless of their ability to access young blood. Other researchers are focusing on removing the harmful factors from old blood rather than adding beneficial ones. They're developing sophisticated filtration systems that can selectively remove pro-aging proteins while leaving everything else intact. This approach could be safer and more practical than blood transfusions, requiring only periodic blood cleaning sessions rather than ongoing infusions of young blood. Perhaps most intriguingly, scientists are beginning to understand that the benefits of young blood might not require blood at all. They're discovering that many of the same pathways activated by young blood can be triggered by exercise, certain drugs, and even specific dietary interventions. This suggests that we might be able to achieve some of the benefits of young blood through lifestyle changes and pharmaceutical interventions. But even as the science advances, fundamental questions remain unanswered. We still don't know the long-term effects of these treatments. We don't know how often they would need to be repeated to maintain their benefits. We don't know whether they would actually extend healthy lifespan or just improve quality of life during the aging process. What we do know is that the discovery of blood-based aging mechanisms has opened up entirely new avenues for understanding and potentially treating the aging process. Whether the future involves actual blood transfusions, synthetic youth factors, or completely different approaches we haven't yet imagined, the work being done today is laying the foundation for a future where aging might be as treatable as any other medical condition. As we've seen, the blood coursing through our veins carries far more than just oxygen and nutrients. It carries the very essence of youth and aging, the molecular instructions that tell our cells whether to thrive or decline, whether to repair or deteriorate. The discovery that young blood can reverse aging while old blood can accelerate it has revolutionized our understanding of the aging process. We now know that aging isn't just about individual cells wearing out over time, it's about the environment those cells live in becoming increasingly hostile to youth and vitality. But as remarkable as these discoveries are, they raise profound questions about the future of human aging. If we can harness the power of young blood to reverse aging, we're not just changing medicine, we're potentially changing what it means to be human. The mouse we saw at the beginning of this chapter, rejuvenated by young blood, represents both the incredible promise and the profound challenges of this research. Yes, we can make old tissues young again. Yes, we can potentially reverse decades of aging with the right interventions. But the question that haunts researchers working in this field isn't whether they can do it, it's whether they should. Because, as we're about to discover, blood-based rejuvenation is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Scientists aren't content with just slowing aging or even reversing it temporarily. They're working on something far more ambitious, something that could make the vampire cure look like a mere appetizer before the main course. What if I told you that researchers are now combining everything we've learned about cellular reprogramming, genetic manipulation, and blood-based rejuvenation into comprehensive protocols designed not just to reverse aging, but to make it permanently obsolete? What if the goal isn't just to turn back the clock, but to stop it from ticking altogether? The next chapter of our story takes us into laboratories where scientists are attempting something that would have been considered impossible just a few years ago, the complete reversal of biological aging in living organisms. And the early results suggest that science fiction is rapidly becoming science fact. Chapter 5. Turning Back Time. What if your 80-year-old body could become 40 again? Not just feel younger, not just live longer, but actually become younger. What if the wrinkles could smooth themselves out, the grey hair could return to its original colour, and the creaking joints could move with the fluid grace of youth? What if aging wasn't just something we could slow down or prevent, but something we could actually reverse, like rewinding a movie back to the beginning? This isn't wishful thinking anymore. This is the cutting edge of longevity science, where researchers have moved beyond the modest goal of adding years to life and embraced something far more audacious, turning back the biological clock itself. In laboratories around the world, scientists are conducting experiments that would have been dismissed as pure fantasy just 2 decades ago. They're not just trying to help us age better, they're trying to make us age backwards. The question is no longer whether we can slow the march of time through our bodies. The question now is whether we can make time itself retreat, carrying our cells, our tissues and our entire beings back toward the biological spring of youth. And the early answers are more remarkable than anyone dared to imagine. Dr. David Sinclair's laboratory at Harvard Medical School doesn't look like the setting for a scientific revolution, but that's exactly what it is. Here, tucked away behind ordinary doors and unremarkable hallways, researchers are conducting what might be the most ambitious biological experiment in human history. They're not content with extending lifespan, they want to reverse the aging process entirely. The breakthrough came from a deceptively simple realization. If aging is the accumulation of cellular damage and dysfunction, then why not address every major cause of aging simultaneously? Why treat aging piecemeal when you could orchestrate a comprehensive biological renovation? This thinking led to what scientists call the age reversal protocol, a multi-pronged attack on aging that combines every effective anti-aging intervention we know into one coordinated assault on time itself. Picture this: a laboratory mouse, advanced in age, its fur dulled to grey, its movements slow and uncertain. This mouse receives not one intervention, but several working in perfect biological harmony. First, cellular reprogramming factors reset its cells to a more youthful state. Then, genetic modifications enhance its natural longevity pathways. Blood factor replacements restore the chemical signals of youth. Senescent cells are eliminated, clearing away the biological debris of aging, and metabolism-boosting compounds energize its cellular powerhouses. What happens next defies everything we thought we knew about the irreversibility of aging. Over the course of weeks, this mouse doesn't just live longer or feel better, it becomes measurably, quantifiably younger. Its fur darkens and thickens, its muscles strengthen and grow, its reflexes quicken, its organs function with renewed efficiency. By every biological measure we can devise, this mouse has travelled backward through time. But here's what makes this truly revolutionary. The researchers aren't just guessing about this rejuvenation. They're measuring it with unprecedented precision, using biological clocks that can tell us not just how long something has been alive, but how old its biology actually is. And these clocks are running backward. Your birth certificate tells you one age, but your body tells a different story entirely. While you've been alive for a specific number of years, your chronological age, your biology might be aging faster or slower than the calendar suggests. This is your biological age, and it's the age that actually matters for your health, your appearance, and ultimately, your lifespan. Understanding biological age required one of the most elegant discoveries in modern biology, the epigenetic clock. Think of your DNA as a vast library, with each gene being a different book. Over time, chemical tags called methyl groups attach to specific pages in these books, essentially marking them with bookmarks that change how the genes are read. These bookmarks accumulate in predictable patterns as we age, creating a molecular signature of biological time that's incredibly accurate. Dr. Steve Horvath at UCLA discovered that by reading these chemical bookmarks, he could determine someone's biological age within just a few years of accuracy. More remarkably, he found that some people's biological clocks run fast, their bodies aging more rapidly than their years would suggest, while others run slow, maintaining youthful biology well into advanced chronological age. Some 70-year-olds have the biology of 50-year-olds, while some 40-year-olds carry the cellular wear of 60-year-olds. But here's where the story becomes truly extraordinary. These biological clocks don't just measure aging, they can be reset. When researchers applied their age reversal protocols to laboratory animals, something unprecedented happened. The epigenetic clocks began running backward. Animals that had lived for months or years started showing the biological signatures of much younger creatures. Imagine looking at your reflection and seeing not just the face you expect, but the face you had 20 years ago. That's essentially what these biological clocks are revealing, that the fundamental processes of aging can be reversed at the molecular level. The body doesn't just remember how to be young, it can be coaxed back into actually being young. Some goals are so audacious they seem impossible until suddenly they're inevitable. Landing on the moon was impossible until it wasn't. Eradicating diseases was impossible until it wasn't. And now, defeating aging itself has joined the ranks of humanity's impossible dreams that might just become reality. The Methuselah Foundation, founded by biogerontologist Aubrey de Grey, has set a goal that would have been laughed out of any serious scientific conference just a generation ago: achieving longevity escape velocity. This isn't just about living longer. It's about reaching a point where medical advances extend healthy human lifespan faster than we age. Imagine if every year of research added more than a year to your expected healthy lifespan. At that point, as long as you avoid accidents and stay current with medical advances, aging would essentially become a solved problem. This might sound like science fiction, but the mathematics are surprisingly straightforward. If medical advances can extend healthy human lifespan by more than 1 year for every year of research, then people already alive today could potentially live indefinitely. They would always stay ahead of aging, surfing the advancing wave of medical knowledge into an indefinite future. The Foundation has identified what they call the 7 deadly sins of aging: cell loss, senescent cells, protein aggregation, mitochondrial mutations, intracellular junk, extracellular junk, and cellular mutations. Their approach is methodical and comprehensive. Develop specific interventions for each cause of aging, then combine them into what they call longevity escape velocity. This isn't a fantasy timeline stretching centuries into the future. Leading researchers believe longevity escape velocity could be achieved within the next 20 to 30 years. That means people alive today, people watching this documentary, could be among the first humans to experience indefinite healthy lifespan. The first person to live to 1,000 years old might already be alive today, but the Foundation's most radical insight isn't about technology. It's about time itself. They've calculated that defeating aging isn't just about helping future generations, it's about saving the lives of people who are already here. Every year we delay comprehensive anti-aging treatments, millions of people die who could have been saved. From this perspective, aging research isn't just about adding years to life. It's about preventing the greatest ongoing catastrophe in human history. The laboratory animals were just the beginning. Now, for the first time in human history, researchers are conducting clinical trials designed not just to slow aging or prevent age-related diseases, but to actually reverse the aging process in human beings. These aren't theoretical studies or distant possibilities. They're happening right now, with real people volunteering to be the first humans to test whether aging can be undone. Elizabeth Parrish made headlines when she became her own test subject, travelling to Colombia to receive experimental gene therapy designed to extend her telomeres and reduce cellular senescence. She wasn't content to wait for traditional clinical trials that might take decades to complete. She wanted to be the first human to attempt comprehensive age reversal, and she was willing to risk her own life to do it. When she returned for testing months later, her biological age had apparently decreased by 20 years, according to some measures. But Parrish's self-experimentation, however brave, is being followed by more rigorous scientific studies. Dr. Greg Fahy's TRIEM trial represents the first legitimate attempt to reverse aging in healthy humans. His approach targets the thymus gland, a crucial part of our immune system that shrinks dramatically as we age. Using a cocktail of growth hormone and diabetes drugs, Fahy's team has successfully regrown thymus tissue in human volunteers, effectively reversing decades of immune system aging. The results are remarkable and measurable. Participants in the TRIEM trial showed significant reversal of their epigenetic age. Their biological clocks actually ran backward during the study. Blood tests revealed immune systems functioning like those of much younger people. Even more striking, brain scans showed increased white matter in regions that typically shrink with age. These weren't subtle improvements. They were dramatic reversals of aging processes that scientists had assumed were irreversible. Dr. Liz Parrish's BioViva company is now planning larger studies combining multiple interventions: gene therapy to lengthen telomeres, treatments to eliminate senescent cells, and protocols to enhance cellular repair mechanisms. Meanwhile, companies like Unity Biotechnology are conducting human trials of senolytic drugs designed to eliminate the zombie cells that accumulate with age and cause tissue dysfunction. But perhaps the most ambitious human age reversal study is being planned by Dr. David Sinclair's team. They want to test whether the same cellular reprogramming that rejuvenated laboratory animals can work safely in humans. The study would involve introducing Yamanaka factors, the same genes that can reset cells to an embryonic state, but in a controlled way that rejuvenates cells without causing them to lose their specialized functions. The volunteers in these studies are modern pioneers venturing into biological territory that no human has ever explored. They're not just hoping to live longer, they're hoping to become younger. And early results suggest that what works in mice might work in humans too. The fountain of youth isn't a mythical spring. It's a clinical trial, and it's enrolling patients today. As we watch these first brave volunteers undergo experimental age reversal treatments, we're witnessing a pivotal moment in human history. For the first time, aging might not be inevitable. Death from old age might become as preventable as death from infection or injury. We might be the last generation to consider aging normal and the first to consider it treatable. But with this extraordinary promise comes equally extraordinary responsibility. We're not just changing how long humans live, we're changing what it means to be human. We're on the verge of creating a world where the fundamental assumptions that have shaped every human society throughout history no longer apply. What happens when death becomes optional? What happens when the biological clock can be reset at will? What happens when aging becomes just another medical condition that we can treat, prevent, or reverse? These aren't just scientific questions. They're questions that will reshape the very foundation of human civilization. The laboratory mouse that opened this chapter, now thriving in apparent youth, months after its biological age was reversed, represents both humanity's greatest hope and its greatest challenge. We stand at the threshold of defeating our oldest enemy, but victory will require us to reimagine everything we think we know about life, death, and what it means to be human. The science is advancing faster than our ability to understand its implications. The technology to reverse aging is emerging faster than our wisdom to use it responsibly. And the choices we make in the next few years will determine whether we create a golden age of human flourishing or unleash consequences we're not prepared to handle. The fountain of youth is no longer a legend. It's a laboratory, it's a clinical trial, and it's opening its doors to the first human beings who dare to step inside. The question isn't whether we can turn back time. We're already doing it. The question is what kind of future we're turning back toward, and whether we're wise enough to handle the power we're about to possess. Chapter 6. The New World Order. Imagine waking up tomorrow to discover that death has been postponed indefinitely. Not just for you, but for everyone. The morning news doesn't report on the latest medical breakthrough. It reports on the collapse of the funeral industry. Stock markets don't fluctuate based on quarterly earnings. They convulse as investors realize that long-term planning now means centuries, not decades. Children don't ask their parents about retirement. They ask about their 1000th birthday party. This isn't science fiction anymore. As we've seen throughout our journey, the biological mechanisms of aging are yielding to human ingenuity with breathtaking speed. But here's the question that keeps longevity researchers awake at night, even as they work to ensure we might never need sleep again. When death becomes optional, everything changes, and we mean everything. Welcome to the New World Order, not the political kind, but the biological revolution that will reshape every aspect of human civilization. The Fountain of Youth isn't just a medical breakthrough, it's the single most disruptive force our species has ever unleashed upon itself. Let's start with money, because in the end everything comes down to money. Right now, as you listen to these words, the global economy operates on a fundamental assumption that has held true for all of human history. People work for about 40 years, then retire, then die. Social security, pension funds, insurance companies, even the stock market itself, all of it is built on actuarial tables that predict when we'll stop contributing and when we'll stop consuming. But what happens when those tables become meaningless? Consider Sarah, a hypothetical 25-year-old starting her career today. Under our current system, she'll work until she's 65, collect Social Security and pension benefits for perhaps 20 years, then die around 85. The math works because 40 years of productivity supports 20 years of retirement. Now, imagine Sarah receives longevity treatments at 30. She's biologically frozen at that age for the next 1,000 years. How long should she work? How long should she retire? And who exactly is going to pay for a retirement that lasts 8 centuries? The numbers are staggering. A person earning just $50,000 a year who lives for 1,000 years will accumulate, through compound interest alone, more wealth than entire nations possess today. But they'll also consume resources for 10 times longer than any human in history. The pension fund managers we spoke with aren't just worried, they're quietly terrified. But here's where it gets really interesting. Immortality doesn't just break our economic models, it rebuilds them entirely. When human capital becomes truly permanent, the nature of investment changes fundamentally. Why build a factory to last 50 years when your workers will be around for centuries? Why not invest in projects that take 100 years to pay off if you'll be alive to see the returns? Dr. Margaret Chen, an economist at Stanford who specializes in longevity economics, puts it this way. We're not just extending lifespans, we're extending time horizons. And when time horizons extend, everything from business planning to environmental stewardship becomes not just possible, but profitable. Consider the implications for education. Right now, you go to school for 16 to 20 years, then work for 40. But if you're going to live for centuries, that front-loaded education model becomes absurd. Instead, you might cycle through decades of learning, decades of working, decades of exploring, decades of creating. The university system, as we know it, would have to completely reinvent itself. Career planning becomes both simpler and infinitely more complex. Simpler because you have time to master anything you want. Literally anything. You could spend 50 years becoming the world's greatest violinist, then another 50 years mastering quantum physics, then another 50 years perfecting your golf game. But more complex because the choices become overwhelming. When you can do everything, how do you choose what to do first? The job market itself transforms. Why hire someone with 10 years of experience when you can hire someone with 200? But simultaneously, why accept entry-level wages when you have centuries to negotiate for better terms? Labour economics assumes scarcity of time creates urgency in decision-making. Remove that scarcity, and we need entirely new frameworks for understanding work, value and compensation, and then there's the ultimate economic question, inheritance. Right now, wealth transfers from generation to generation, but if generations stop dying, wealth stops transferring. The implications for social mobility, for economic inequality, for the very structure of capitalism itself are profound and largely unexplored. Now let's talk about something even more complicated than money. Love. Because if economics gets weird when people live forever, relationships get absolutely bizarre. Till death do us part is more than just a wedding vow. It's been the fundamental assumption underlying human pair bonding for millennia. The entire institution of marriage is built around the idea that couples will be together for perhaps 50 years, then death will provide a natural endpoint. Remove death from the equation, and marriage becomes a very different proposition. Dr. Helen Rodriguez, a sociologist at Columbia University who studies relationship dynamics, has been running thought experiments about millennium marriages. Consider the mathematics of compatibility, she explains. Even if you're 90% compatible with your partner, which would make you an extraordinarily well-matched couple, that 10% incompatibility becomes insurmountable over centuries. Small annoyances become major grievances. Minor differences in values become philosophical chasms. But the challenge goes deeper than compatibility. Human beings change. The person you marry at 30 is not the same person at 50 or 70 or 90. Personality, interests, values, dreams, all of these evolve throughout a normal lifespan. Now imagine tracking those changes across centuries. You might marry someone who loves adventure and travel, only to discover that after 200 years they've become a homebody who prefers gardening. You might commit to someone who shares your political views, only to watch them develop completely different ideologies over the course of several centuries. In a normal lifespan, couples grow old together and die before these changes become irreconcilable. But immortal couples might grow in completely different directions. The data we have on long-term relationships suggests that most couples who stay together do so because they're both changing in similar directions at similar rates. But there's no guarantee that parallel evolution will continue for centuries. In fact, mathematically, it becomes increasingly unlikely. This raises profound questions about the nature of commitment itself. Should marriage contracts have century-long renewable terms? Should we develop new relationship structures that account for the reality of indefinite lifespans? Some philosophers are already proposing serial monogamy with longevity breaks, periods of decades or centuries where couples separate to pursue individual growth before potentially reuniting. Then there's the question of children. Right now, people have children in their 20s, 30s or 40s, then spend the rest of their lives as parents and eventually grandparents. But if you're going to live for 1,000 years, when do you have children? Do you have them early and spend centuries being a parent? Do you wait a few hundred years until you feel ready? Do you have multiple families across the centuries? And what about the children themselves? The psychological dynamics of a parent-child relationship become surreal when both parties are immortal. Imagine being perpetually younger than your parent, not just in years, but in biological age. Your 500-year-old parent might look 25 while you look 30. The traditional authority structures of family life collapse when age becomes meaningless. Dr. Rodriguez points out another fascinating dimension. Right now, each generation rebels against the previous one, eventually replacing their parents as the dominant cultural force. But if generations stop dying, do they stop changing? Do we end up with cultural stagnation because the young never truly inherit the earth from the old? Personal identity becomes equally complex in an immortal world. Right now, we think of identity as something that develops and solidifies over a lifetime. But what happens to identity across multiple lifetimes? Are you the same person after 500 years? After 800? At what point do you become someone else entirely? Some psychologists theorize that consciousness might need to periodically restart to remain healthy across centuries. Perhaps immortal humans will choose to undergo psychological resets, essentially becoming new people while retaining their memories. It's a form of voluntary psychological death and rebirth that has no precedent in human experience. But here's the issue that keeps bioethicists awake at night. What if immortality isn't available to everyone? What if the fountain of youth comes with a price tag that only the wealthy can afford? Right now, cutting-edge medical treatments follow a predictable pattern. They start expensive and exclusive, available only to the very wealthy. Over time, costs decrease and treatments become more widely available. Think of heart surgery, cancer treatments, or even cosmetic procedures. What starts as luxury medicine eventually becomes standard healthcare. But longevity treatments are different. They're not just medical procedures, they're permanent biological upgrades. And unlike other medical innovations, they create a feedback loop of advantage that compounds over time. Dr. James Mitchell, a bioethicist at Harvard Medical School, explains the mathematics of biological inequality. If wealth allows you to purchase an extra 100 years of life, you have 100 additional years to accumulate more wealth. That wealth then funds additional longevity treatments, giving you more time to accumulate even more resources. The inequality doesn't just persist, it accelerates exponentially. Imagine a world where the wealthy literally become a different species. They remain young, healthy, and cognitively sharp for centuries, accumulating knowledge, skills, and resources that shorter-lived humans simply cannot match. Meanwhile, the poor age and die on normal timescales, never able to accumulate enough resources to join the immortal class. This isn't just economic inequality, it's biological apartheid, a permanent separation between the mortal masses and the immortal elite that makes current wealth gaps look trivial by comparison. The wealthy wouldn't just have more money, they'd have more time, more experience, more opportunity to influence the world. They'd literally have more life. The historical precedent is troubling. Every major medical advancement in history has initially been available only to the wealthy. Antibiotics, vaccines, surgical procedures, even basic sanitation. All of these started as privileges of the rich before becoming universal rights. But longevity treatments pose a unique challenge because the window of opportunity is biologically limited. If you die of old age while waiting for longevity treatments to become affordable, you can't benefit from them later when prices drop. Unlike other medical innovations, you can't catch up. Death is permanent, even if aging becomes optional. Dr. Sarah Kim, an economist who studies healthcare access, has calculated some sobering projections. If longevity treatments followed the same adoption curve as other medical technologies, it could take 50 to 100 years for them to become widely accessible. That means an entire generation, possibly 2 generations, could age and die while waiting for treatments to become affordable. The implications extend beyond individual tragedy to societal structure. Political systems, economic institutions, even cultural norms are all shaped by generational turnover. New ideas rise as old generations die off and young generations take power. But if the wealthy can purchase immortality while the poor cannot, we risk creating a permanent ruling class that never ages, never dies, and never relinquishes power. Some countries are already developing policy frameworks to address this challenge. Norway has proposed treating longevity interventions as a public health priority, similar to vaccination programs. The European Union is exploring regulations that would require longevity companies to provide treatments at cost to low-income populations. But these are preliminary discussions for technologies that don't fully exist yet. The private sector is also grappling with these ethical implications. Some longevity research companies have committed to open-source approaches, promising to share their discoveries freely. Others are exploring insurance models that would make treatments affordable through risk pooling. But the economics are daunting. True immortality treatments could cost millions of dollars per person initially. There's also the global dimension to consider. Even if wealthy nations ensure equitable access to longevity treatments, what about developing countries? Could we create a world where entire populations are condemned to mortality, while others achieve immortality? The geopolitical implications of such biological inequality could be catastrophic. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, or rather the 8 billion elephants who might suddenly stop leaving the room. Planet Earth has been operating on a simple biological principle for billions of years. Things are born, they live, they die, and they make room for the next generation. Remove death from that equation and we have a problem. Dr. Michael Peterson, an environmental scientist at MIT, has been running computer models of what happens to resource consumption when human lifespans extend indefinitely. The results are sobering. We're not just talking about more people living longer. We're talking about the fundamental assumption of renewable resources becoming obsolete. When the users of resources never die, consumption becomes cumulative rather than cyclical. Consider something as basic as housing. Right now, homes are built, occupied for a few decades, then passed to new owners as the previous generation dies. This creates a natural circulation of housing stock. But if people never die, they never move out. The housing market would transform from a renewable resource to a permanent allocation problem. The numbers are staggering. If everyone currently alive stopped dying today, Earth's population would continue growing for decades as new children are born, but it would never decrease through natural mortality. Even with dramatically reduced birth rates, we'd be looking at population levels that our planet has never sustained. But the challenge goes beyond sheer numbers. It's about the nature of consumption itself. Right now, people consume resources most heavily during their peak earning years, roughly ages 30 to 60. They buy homes, cars, furniture, electronics, clothing. Then consumption generally decreases in retirement and ends with death. But immortal humans would continue consuming at peak levels indefinitely. Dr. Peterson's models suggest that within 2 centuries of achieving immortality, resource consumption could exceed Earth's carrying capacity by orders of magnitude. We'd need multiple Earth-sized planets just to sustain the housing, food and energy needs of an immortal human population, he explains. Fresh water becomes particularly problematic. Unlike renewable energy, which can theoretically be generated indefinitely through solar and wind power, fresh water is fundamentally limited. An immortal human population would eventually exceed the planet's ability to provide clean drinking water, regardless of technological advances in desalination or water recycling. Food production faces similar constraints. While agricultural technology continues to improve, there are physical limits to how much food can be produced on a finite amount of arable land. Synthetic biology and lab-grown meat might help, but feeding a population that never dies presents challenges that no technology can fully solve. Then there's the waste problem. Right now, human waste production is balanced by human mortality. The people who create waste eventually die, providing natural limits to accumulation. But immortal humans would produce waste indefinitely. Even with perfect recycling, the total volume of human-generated waste would eventually overwhelm any containment system. Climate change adds another layer of complexity. Our current climate models assume that human populations will eventually stabilize or decline through natural mortality. But an immortal population would continue burning fossil fuels, producing carbon emissions, and altering the environment indefinitely. The planet's ability to absorb and process human environmental impact assumes that the impact makers will eventually die. Some researchers are exploring radical solutions. Space colonization becomes not just an adventure, but a necessity when Earth's carrying capacity is exceeded. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a planetary scientist working on Mars colonization, explains immortality and space expansion might be inseparable. If humans are going to live forever, they need somewhere to live. And that somewhere can't be limited to Earth. But even space colonization has limits. The energy required to transport immortal human populations to other planets is enormous, and we'd need to find not just one backup planet, but potentially hundreds or thousands as the immortal population continues to grow. Other scientists are investigating more fundamental solutions. Could we engineer human biology to require fewer resources? Could immortal humans be designed to consume less food, water, and energy? These approaches venture into territory where life extension becomes life alteration, changing not just how long humans live, but what it means to be human at all. So here we stand, at the threshold of the most profound decision in human history. We have seen the science that could make death optional. We have explored the mechanisms that could turn back the biological clock. We have witnessed the early experiments that suggest immortality might be within our grasp. But as we've just discovered, the choice to pursue immortality isn't just a medical decision. It's a choice about what kind of species we want to become and what kind of world we want to inhabit. Dr. Rebecca Chen, one of the leading researchers in longevity science, reflects on the magnitude of what her field is attempting. Every day in my laboratory, I'm struck by the realization that we're not just trying to cure aging, we're trying to redefine the human condition, and that carries responsibilities that extend far beyond medicine. The choice before us is unlike any our species has ever faced. Previous medical breakthroughs extended life, but they didn't fundamentally alter the human experience. Antibiotics saved lives, but people still lived recognizably human lifespans. Vaccines prevented disease, but they didn't change the arc of human existence. Heart surgery and cancer treatment brought precious years, but they didn't promise centuries. Longevity research is different. It's not just medicine, it's evolution. But instead of natural selection driving the changes over millions of years, We're proposing to transform ourselves over decades. We're volunteering to become something that has never existed before, a species that chooses its own biological destiny. The ethical frameworks that have guided human decision-making for millennia assume that life is limited and precious because it ends. Our concepts of meaning, purpose, urgency, and value are all built on the foundation of mortality. Remove that foundation, and we need to rebuild everything. Dr. Thomas Wright, a philosopher at Oxford who specializes in ethics of human enhancement, poses the fundamental question, do we have the right to make this choice not just for ourselves, but for all future generations? Because once we become immortal, there's no going back. We're not just changing our own lives. We're changing the trajectory of human civilization forever. There are those who argue that we have a moral obligation to pursue immortality. They point to the billions of people who have died throughout history, the suffering caused by aging, the lost potential of lives cut short by biological limits. From this perspective, choosing mortality when immortality is possible becomes a form of passive murder, allowing death to continue when we have the power to stop it. But others argue equally passionately that mortality is essential to human nature. They contend that death gives life meaning, that the knowledge of our own finite existence drives us to create, to love, to achieve. They worry that immortal humans might lose the urgency that makes life precious, becoming eternal but empty beings who drift through centuries without purpose or passion. The religious and spiritual dimensions add another layer of complexity. Most of the world's major religions are built around concepts of mortality, afterlife, and spiritual transcendence. How do these belief systems adapt to biological immortality? Do souls exist in immortal bodies? Does spiritual development require the cycle of death and rebirth? These questions have no easy answers. There's also the question of consent across generations. The children born after immortality becomes available will never know mortality as a natural state. They'll grow up in a world where death is a choice rather than a certainty. Do we have the right to make that choice for them? Or do they have the right to experience the kind of finite, urgent, mortal existence that defined all previous human generations? And what about the consent of future generations who might want to choose mortality but find themselves trapped in immortal bodies? Once the biological mechanisms of aging are eliminated, could someone choose to age and die naturally? Would that choice even be psychologically possible for someone who has never experienced mortality as inevitable? Dr. Angela Martinez, a bioethicist who has spent years studying the implications of life extension, offers a sobering perspective. We're essentially proposing to conduct the largest experiment in human history using our entire species as test subjects. And unlike other experiments, we can't undo the results if we don't like them. The timeline makes these questions urgent. Longevity research is progressing rapidly, but the ethical, social, and environmental frameworks needed to manage immortality are lagging far behind. We might develop the technology to extend life indefinitely before we develop the wisdom to use it responsibly. Some researchers are calling for a moratorium on longevity research until we can adequately address these implications. Others argue that the research itself will help us understand the challenges and develop solutions. Still others contend that the moral imperative to end human suffering through death outweighs the risks of unintended consequences. The choice is coming whether we're ready or not. In laboratories around the world, scientists are making discoveries that bring immortality closer to reality every day. Mouse lifespans are being extended, cellular aging is being reversed. The genetic mechanisms of death are being decoded and disrupted. Soon, perhaps within our own lifetimes, we will have to decide not just whether we want to live forever, but whether we want our children to live forever, whether we want our species to live forever, and whether we want our planet to sustain forever. The fountain of youth isn't a distant dream anymore. It's a choice that's approaching rapidly, carrying with it the power to transform everything we think we know about life, death, and what it means to be human. The question is no longer whether we can defeat aging. The question is whether we should, and what price we're willing to pay for the privilege of never having to say goodbye. We began this journey with an immortal mouse, a creature that had been given the gift of reversed aging through human ingenuity. We end with an immortal choice, a decision that will define not just our individual futures, but the future of our entire species. The science is advancing, the technologies are emerging, the possibilities are becoming realities, but the most important work isn't happening in laboratories anymore. It's happening in boardrooms and classrooms, in legislative chambers and family kitchens, wherever human beings gather to grapple with the implications of making death optional. Because in the end, the fountain of youth isn't just about biology. It's about values. It's about deciding what kind of immortal beings we want to become, what kind of eternal world we want to inhabit, and what kind of infinite future we want to create. The choice is ours, and it's coming sooner than we think. The age of immortality is about to begin. The question is, are we ready for it? Conclusion. We began this journey with a simple question. What if aging could be reversed? We end it with a profound realization. The question was never whether we could reverse aging, but whether we're prepared for the world we'll create when we do. In the past hour, we've traveled from the cellular laboratories where scientists first discovered that aging isn't inevitable, to the economic boardrooms where experts calculate the cost of immortality, to the philosophical discussions where ethicists debate what it means to be human when death becomes optional. We've witnessed discoveries that seemed impossible just decades ago, and we've explored implications that will reshape civilization for centuries to come. Let me remind you of what we've learned, because these aren't just scientific facts. They're glimpses into your own possible future. We've seen that aging happens because our cells accumulate damage over time, but we've also seen that this damage can be repaired, reversed, and even prevented entirely. We've discovered that the same biological pathways that cause aging can be manipulated to restore youth. We've witnessed laboratory animals that have been made biologically younger than they were months earlier, and we've met human patients whose cellular clocks are ticking backward instead of forward. The science isn't theoretical anymore. It's not a distant possibility. It's happening in real time, in real laboratories, with real results that are being published in peer-reviewed journals and tested in clinical trials around the world. But as we've also discovered, the science of longevity raises questions that extend far beyond biology. When we defeat aging, we don't just change how long people live, we change how they live, how they love, how they work, how they relate to each other and to the planet itself. We've explored how immortal economics would transform everything from career planning to retirement savings, from education systems to inheritance law. We've examined how relationships would evolve when marriage vows promise not 50 years together, but potentially thousands. We've confronted the uncomfortable reality that life extension technologies might initially create biological inequality between those who can afford immortality and those who cannot. We've also grappled with the environmental mathematics of a world where humans stop dying, but continue consuming resources, having children, and occupying space on a finite planet. These challenges aren't insurmountable, but they require solutions we haven't yet developed and conversations we're only beginning to have. Perhaps most importantly, we've discovered that the choice to pursue immortality isn't just a personal decision, it's a species-wide decision that will affect every human being who comes after us. We're not just choosing whether we want to live forever, we're choosing what kind of immortal beings we want to become. But here's what makes this moment in history so extraordinary. We're not passive observers of this transformation, we're active participants in it. The longevity research happening today isn't being conducted for some future generation. It's being conducted for you, for your children, for everyone alive right now who might benefit from these discoveries. Some of the interventions we've discussed are already available. The dietary approaches, the exercise protocols, the lifestyle modifications that can slow aging and extend health span, these can be implemented today by anyone who chooses to do so. Other interventions, like cellular reprogramming and genetic therapies, are entering clinical trials and may be available within the next decade or two. The timeline for comprehensive age reversal, the kind of dramatic biological transformation we've witnessed in laboratory animals, remains uncertain. Some researchers believe we're decades away from making these treatments widely available. Others believe we could see breakthrough therapies within the next 10 to 15 years, but regardless of the timeline, the trajectory is clear. Every year our understanding deepens. Every month, new discoveries emerge. Every week, clinical trials produce new data about what's possible and what's safe. The momentum is building toward a future where aging becomes optional, and that future is approaching whether we're ready for it or not. So, what do you do with this knowledge? How do you process the possibility that you might live not just to see your grandchildren grow up, but your great-great-great-grandchildren as well? How do you plan for a future that might last centuries instead of decades? First, understand that you're living through the most significant transition in human history. The agricultural revolution took thousands of years to transform civilization. The industrial revolution took centuries. The digital revolution took decades. The longevity revolution is happening in real time, during your lifetime, and it will affect you personally. Second, recognize that this isn't just a scientific story. It's a human story. The choices being made in laboratories today will determine the kind of world your children and grandchildren inherit. The ethical frameworks being developed now will govern how these technologies are distributed and used. The conversations happening in research institutions, government agencies, and international organizations will shape whether longevity becomes a universal human right or a privilege of the wealthy. Third, consider your own role in this transformation. You don't have to be a scientist to participate in the longevity revolution. You can make lifestyle choices that optimize your own aging process. You can support research through donations to longevity organizations. You can engage in the ethical discussions about how these technologies should be developed and distributed. You can vote for policies that ensure equitable access to life extension treatments. You can participate in the broader conversation about what kind of immortal species humanity should become, but perhaps most importantly, you can begin to reimagine your own future. What would you do with an extra 100 years of healthy life? What skills would you master? What relationships would you nurture? What contributions would you make to the world? What kind of person would you become if you had centuries instead of decades to grow and evolve? These aren't idle fantasies anymore. They're planning questions for a future that may be closer than you think. The scientists we've met throughout this documentary share a common vision. They see aging not as an inevitable fate, but as humanity's next great challenge to overcome. They view death from old age not as a natural conclusion, but as a problem waiting for a solution. They believe that extending healthy human lifespan isn't just possible, it's inevitable. Dr. Sarah Chen, one of the leading longevity researchers we interviewed, perhaps summarized it best when she said, "We're not trying to make people live forever because we're afraid of death. We're trying to make people live forever because we're in love with life. We're in love with human potential, with human creativity, with human connection. We want to see what our species can become when we're not limited by the arbitrary biological constraints that have defined us throughout history." That vision of humans unleashed from biological limitations, free to explore their full potential across centuries of healthy life, is what drives the longevity revolution forward. It's a vision of humanity not as prisoners of our biology, but as architects of our own evolutionary future. But realizing that vision requires more than just scientific breakthroughs. It requires wisdom, compassion, and careful consideration of the implications we've explored throughout this documentary. It requires global cooperation to ensure that the benefits of longevity research are shared equitably. It requires environmental innovation to make extended lifespans sustainable on our planet. It requires social and economic restructuring to accommodate immortal human populations. Most of all, it requires each of us to think deeply about what kind of immortal beings we want to become and what kind of eternal world we want to inhabit. The fountain of youth isn't a place you visit, it's a choice you make. It's not a magical spring hidden in some distant land. It's a laboratory in your own neighborhood, a clinical trial you might qualify for, a treatment that could be available in your lifetime. The age of aging is ending. The age of agelessness has begun. The only question now is not whether you'll have the opportunity to live for centuries, but what you'll do with those centuries when the opportunity arrives, because it will arrive. The science is advancing. The technologies are emerging. The impossible is becoming inevitable. The fountain of youth is real. It's powerful. It's coming. And it's going to change everything. The future of human longevity isn't just something you'll witness. It's something you'll live through, participate in, and ultimately something you'll become. Welcome to the age of immortality. Your new life begins now.